Hi students, we are going to go through the elements of art and principles of design in this presentation. The reason that I am doing it individually is so that you can walk through it at your own pace. You can pause the video at any time to copy the notes in your sketchbook. You can take as long as you need to get the information down in your sketchbook, okay? For directions and grading, just make sure that you include the definitions as well as the drawings that go with each element or principle. You'll be graded on both, so make sure you include both. I will say that these are notes, and notes look different for different people. So write down what you think is most important. You do not need to copy everything word for word, but take down the most important information when it comes to what you think you need to remember. Okay, this is for you. Yes, you're getting a grade for it, but it is for you. So make sure you're writing down what would be helpful to you. So we're going to start with the elements of art. You can see on the project file that I gave some examples of how you could lay out your notes. You can pause this and go back there if you want to lay it out the way that I did. It'll go through the presentation with the same setup as the digital mock-up that I included on the project file. But here we go. So, elements of art. These are the building blocks or ingredients of any artwork. If you think of it like you are baking a cake, you need the flour, the sugar, the eggs, the butter, the chocolate chips. You need those all in order to make a delicious cookie. In the same way, you need these 7 elements of art to make an artwork work. It doesn't work if you are missing some of the elements. You can have less of some and more of others, but you should be able to find every single element in everything you create in here, okay? The first one we're going to look at is line. My picture's a little bit blurry, but this is a Calder wire sculpture. A line is described as a mark with length and direction. I'm sure you're familiar with that from geometry. A continuous mark made on a surface by a moving point. So everything is made up of lines. You can even see on this PowerPoint, there are lines that make up these colors here. Words are made up of lines, but we need lines in our images. They may be thick or thin or long or short. There are so many different ways you could describe lines, but lines are crucial for art pieces. Having different variety in your lines, like I said, that creates interest and a sense of movement. On the next slide, I'll show you an image of hatching and cross hatching. You can use lines to create value, which is another element that we'll talk about soon. And line quality or line weight refers to the thickness or thinness of a line. So you could have, like I said, thin lines, thick lines, short, long, jagged, zigzag, vertical, horizontal, so many different types of lines, honestly, too many to count. But what I need you to do is to draw the following images in your notes. So give me those examples of these 4 types of lines here. Obviously, there's more than these in the whole entire world, but here's some examples that are often used. And then, like I said, you can use lines to show value. So hatching is here on the left and cross hatching on the right. The difference, as you can see in the example above, is just cross hatching has a secondary line that crosses over top of the initial line. And line quality, you have some thin lines and thick lines that creates interest. If at any point you need to go back one slide and write those words down better, do so, and pause now to get these images down. Once you have those, then you can pick up where you left off and keep moving. Our second element is shape. There are shapes in everything that you draw, especially in 2D design, because they're flat. They're enclosed areas and they only have 2 dimensions. There's 2 types of shapes that we're going to focus on. That's geometric and organic. The geometric shapes are the ones that have a specific equation or formula, and they're described as being man-made. So we're talking triangles, circles, rectangles, squares, dodecagons, if you want to just have at it with the geometry. I don't even know any others that I can think of, but it has a specific equation. You will use them in a math class. Organic shapes, they do not follow an equation, and they're typically associated with nature, and they have been called free form as well. So think of leaves and different plants. Paint blobs are organic shapes. They kind of go wherever they want. On the next slide, I have some examples of shapes. So make sure you draw. They don't have to be exactly these, but here are some examples that you can use. Go ahead and move out of the way. That you can use drawing next to your definition. Again, if you need to go back a little bit and pause it on the previous slide to get those notes down, please do so. Following shape is form, the 3D version of shape. So they have depth, length, and height, whereas shape only has length and width. 2D art can create the illusion of form using perspective and shading techniques. We are in 2D design, and so we won't be creating 3-dimensional forms, but we will be creating an artwork that uses perspective techniques to create the illusion of form. Okay, like I said previously, it's 2 dimensions versus 3 dimensions, okay? In the same way, form can be geometric and organic. On the next slide, I have some drawings of both. We're talking rectangular prism, a sphere, cone, pyramid, any of those geometric shapes, geometric forms that you have learned about in the math classroom will fall into that category. Organic, it's more of the 3-dimensional objects found in nature. So a little trickier to draw because I need to shade it really to show that depth. Here are some drawings of rectangular prism, pyramid, cylinder, forgot that last time. And then you can draw a tree, you can draw a leaf, add a little bit of shading to try and show that it's 3-dimensional, but it is, well, impossible to put a form on a 2D surface. We can make it look like it's an illusion of form, but it's not ever going to be a physical form on a piece of paper, okay? Next, we're going to talk about space. So space is technically defined by the artist. So the artist decides where space is going to be, how much space is taken up, and what it looks like. There is typically an inclusion of background, foreground, and middle ground to create an illusion of depth. Like I said, for form, we can create an illusion that these buildings are 3-dimensional, but we know that it's a flat piece of paper. It's just tricking our eyes into thinking that it's 3-dimensional. So it comes down to 2 types of space. There's a positive space and there's negative space. The lamp here is the positive space. It's the space, the shape that makes up the positive space. The negative space is the area around the object. So sometimes, for me, it is easier if I look at negative space when I'm trying to draw an object than looking at the object. Because I can see, like, if I look at this lamp, it's almost like a rectangle of negative space at the top where the bottom of the lampshade is, and a kind of curve down the side. So I'm looking at the negative space in order to draw the positive space. We will work on this. I know that's kind of seems counterintuitive, but it is super helpful when you are drawing because it helps you break it down. It is something that's black and white and simple to understand versus thinking too hard looking at a really detailed object. I'm talking about that perspective again. It is a technique that uses lines to create the illusion of depth. I want you to draw, it doesn't have to be exactly this picture, but draw a perspective drawing, and please make sure you label it. The biggest thing is the vanishing point, which I made a red dot on. That's where all lines go to in a 1-point perspective drawing, which is what this is right here. You have a background, a middle ground, and a foreground, again, to create the illusion of depth. We will talk about other tips and tricks to create the illusion of depth in one of our later projects this semester, but this is a helpful little drawing that can guide you through a very simple perspective drawing if that's something you want to use for sketchbook challenges or other things later down the road. The next one is texture. And in 2D, it's how the object looks like it might feel. Because it's 2D, it doesn't actually have texture. It's just how we perceive that it might feel. In 3D, it is the way an object actually feels. But in 2D, it's the illusion pretty much of a texture, or it looks like how it would feel. So there's different ways that you can create an illusion of texture. Line, shape, and value are crucial to help you imply that texture. Rough texture can be implied through jagged lines and pointy shapes and uneven shading, while smooth texture, you want to use curved lines, rounded shapes, and even shading. If you need more help with that, I'd be glad to help you. Adding texture is really what adds interest to a piece, and you can add lots of different textures. When we get to the principles of design, we'll talk about contrast and how you can have two textures side by side that help create contrast in your image. Value is really important. You can see on the right is the value scale. You will actually need to draw one of those in your notes, and that will give you direction on the next slide. You might end up coming back just a little bit, but value is the lightness or darkness of a color, okay? There's a black and white value scale there, but value is of any color. So you can make a value scale of blues. You can make a value scale of greens. It does not have to be a black and white value scale in your notes. These are keywords you need to know. The reason I give you vocab words is because I don't want you to ask me something and I not understand what on earth you're talking about because you're not using vocab terms that are helpful. So a tint is the light values. When we talk about painting, you add white to a color to make a tint. Shade would be the darker values in painting. You add black to a value to make a shade. Highlights is where the light hits on an object, and shadow is where the light does not reach. So bold there at the bottom, draw and shade in a value scale with at least 6 values. Like I said, you can turn back to a few seconds to the last slide that showed in the video and copy that there. I know that's more than 6 values in that value scale, so you only need 6. It can be black and white, it can be blue, it can be purple, it can be whatever value you would like. It just needs to show a range from light to dark. The way that you can do that if you are using color pencil or any pencil is by changing the pressure of your pencil. So if you're making the lightest value, you're going to press very lightly with your pencil. The darkest value is going to be very heavy pressure on your pencil and cover it over multiple times to make a really dark value. The ones in between, obviously you change the pressure as you go up and down the scale. Our last element will probably take you the most time to complete in your notes, and that's color. The scientific version, it's created by light, and the light hits an object. Some of the colors are absorbed while others are reflected. So say I have a red apple and the light hits the red apple, all colors but red are absorbed into the apple, and the red bounces back and reflects into my eye so that I see the color red. Okay, we're going to draw a color wheel together, but there are some terms I need you to know. So we have primary colors. On the color wheel, I'll have those labeled. That's red, yellow, and blue. Secondary colors are green, orange, and purple, or violet, if you want to call it that. A hue is the name that we give a color. For example, yellow, red, red-violet, okay? A value is how light or dark a color is. We just learned that in the last element, but each hue can have a different value. Your complementary colors, when someone gives you a compliment, they are saying something good about you. So complementary colors work well or look good together. That helps you remember it, take it. They are located across from each other on the wheel. I will point those out once we get to the wheel in the next slide. Analogous colors are 3 colors next to each other on the wheel. Those always look good together. I tend to go for the blue, green, yellow analogous combo. I just love how those colors look together. Even in this presentation, you have purples, reds, and oranges going into yellow. Those are analogous. They work together well. They're also warmer colors. Purple does fall into cool, but if you have a purple violet, red violet, then that would be a warm color. So you need to include a color wheel in your notes. This is just one I drew up quickly on my Procreate app. You have complements, like I said, across from each other on the wheel. So red and green are complements. Purple and yellow are complements. Blue and orange are complements. The primary colors have the solid triangle connecting them, and the secondary colors have a dotted triangle connecting them. Pause here, take your time getting a good color wheel in. I made my tertiary colors. Those are the ones in between, these little guys. I made those smaller just because they're not my main colors. You make your wheel how you want. You will absolutely use this throughout I know there's only one color wheel in the classroom, so you could have this one at your fingertips at any time. So take your time on your color wheel. When you're ready, you can start the video again, and we are going to be moving to the principles of design. So the principles describe the ways that artists use the elements in a work of art. I really just have definitions for these. I don't have little sketches with them. If you find that it's helpful to sketch something with it, by all means, go for it. So balance. You always want to make sure that your image is balanced. It's how the visual weight is distributed in an image. There's asymmetrical balance, symmetrical balance, and radial balance. Symmetrical is when everything mirrors one another. Asymmetrical, there is not an exact copy on the other side if I was to fold it in half, but it still feels balanced. Most images are asymmetrical balance. And then radial is there's kind of like a circular balance throughout the piece. You can see here on the right, this is a Kandinsky piece. And it would be an asymmetrical balance. There's not a mirror. If I was to cut the image in half, it does not perfectly line up with one another. And I know it's not the whole image, but it is balanced, and there's a lot going on there. You can see lines, shapes, and colors are huge in there. You see textures, you see values. Like I said, every element of art is somewhere in a painting or picture, okay? So make sure you write down your definition of balance, and then you can move on to the next part. Contrast. Contrast is the use of opposite elements in a composition to create interest. Some examples are light versus dark and large versus small. There are so many things that you can contrast against each other. So in this image, you have dark versus light. There's a big dark wall behind this pottery or urn, and then there's a light going in on the other side. You have to have contrast to create interest. If everything is all the same, then your viewer is going to not be looking at your picture very long. You want contrast to keep the viewer involved in your piece, so their eye is still looking around trying to figure out what's going on. Try and think of some other examples of things that you could use to show contrast. Emphasis. This is used to make certain parts of an artwork stand out. It creates a focal point or where your eye goes first. So this is a Vermeer painting. I really hope it's Vermeer. And Girl with the Pearl Earring. Your eye, where does it go first? I want you to think about it. Mine goes to the face first, and then it goes down to the pearl earring, kind of up the back of the hair covering, and then back to the face. I don't really go down to the chest or shoulder, but there is an emphasis. So the artist used different values to create emphasis, different colors to create emphasis. So you can tell that her face has a lighter value than the background, so it really stands out. Also, a clear use of contrast, contrasting light versus dark. So you want some point of your image, whatever you're creating, to be the focal point. Where do you want the viewer to look first? It's more than likely the most important part of your artwork. So when you are creating, think about, what is my number one message that I want my viewer to pick up, and where should their eye go first in order for that message to come across? Okay? Think about, where can I make them look first? How can I make them look there first? Figure out what you want the emphasis to be on. So this one is movement. This is Rembrandt, and I was actually watching a Netflix show about this piece being stolen from a museum in, I want to say Boston. I think it was Boston. And I haven't finished the whole show yet, so I don't know. I'm going to guess it's still stolen and lost, but it is Storm on the Sea of Galilee. And I picked this one because you can see movement in the water here. Movement is how your eye moves through the composition and leads the viewer through the artwork. And this can create the illusion of action. So if I look, I know my head's in the way right here, but if I look at this water, like I feel it moving. I can feel that there's a strong wind pulling against the sails. The disciples are working hard trying to not capsize. I would love to see if, oh yeah, there's Jesus. Oh, there's my head. There's Jesus. I'm thinking right there. You can see that the artist used some contrast and different values to show that this is Jesus. How did I know that was Jesus? There's kind of a little orb or light around him. Everyone see that? At least, yeah, I'm pretty sure that's Jesus. But there's action going on in this painting. So I look here first. The artist used value again to bring my emphasis to this point over here where most of the action is taking place. And then I kind of move down here. I follow this curve of the boat. Use of lines right there. And then my eye kind of comes back around. It kind of does this circle until I knew Jesus was in here, so I needed to find him. Pieces should have movement. You shouldn't have your viewer just staring at one spot in your artwork. You want them to take in everything that you have created. You put it there with a purpose. You don't just want it to sit there and not be looked at. So we need to figure out ways to get our viewer to keep looking around our entire artwork, because we put things in places for a reason. Okay? Make sure your work has the movement. Our next one is pattern. So this is an MC Escher tessellation. That's a big word. If you look closely, there's no negative space. Everything is, I'm going to say it's a type of lizard. Okay? But there's an obvious pattern here. It's a repetition of specific elements such as line or shape. I would say it's both line and shape in this one. It's just the same lizard repeated over and over and over again. You can create interest with patterns, create texture using patterns. It just adds a deeper element to your piece. Next, we are going to look at rhythm. So rhythm and pattern seems like they would be the exact same thing, but pattern is a specific element that's repeated over and over and over again. So dots, like the same dot repeated, or if it's like dot, triangle, that's a pattern. Rhythm is a repetition of elements to create interest and cohesion. It's not a specific element. So that's kind of the big keyword difference there. This is actually a Van Gogh painting, and it's zoomed in, and I wanted to focus on the rhythm of these trees. It kind of takes you into the forest. It's not a perfect pattern, though. There are trees that repeat themselves, but they're not the exact same tree. Each tree has a little bit of a different sway to it and detail. So there is rhythm because they are consistently growing, like at different paces in this forest here, but it's not a perfect pattern. We can use rhythm to create some interest or lead the viewer's eyes back into a certain place that you want them to look. But rhythm is helpful just overall to create some cohesion and interest. All right, unity. Let me move myself here one more time. Whoops. So unity. This is the big goal of your artwork. You want your piece to have unity. That all of the marks you make, the lines, the colors, the textures, they all agree together. They work together. And they look like they fit together. If I was to look at this painting, it's a Monet, and I took one of those like lizards from MC Escher a couple slides ago and just plop it right on there, the unity would go out the window. It would make no sense. Why is this lizard here? I don't know. I don't think it was meant to be here. You have to have like a similar style in your pieces. Now, I'm not saying you can't use different styles, but you have to have some repetition of different styles for them to feel unified. You can't just use them haphazardly or randomly. You need to figure out how to tie things together, okay? If you're having trouble with that, go back to using repetition with the rhythm of different elements and see how you can create more unity that way. Think about how you're applying your materials and see if that's more helpful too. If you are applying them in different ways, then it won't feel as unified. Whereas if you're using your chalk pastel in the same way you do the clouds as the grass, then it's going to feel more unified. The last slide, just kind of where I get my pictures from. But going back to unity, that's our goal, okay? Make sure you have every element and picture that goes with each element. Make sure you have every definition for the principles of design. If you go back to the project file, you can just check how you're going to turn this in and let me know if you have questions. There is the FAQ section on the project file, but feel free to ask me in class if you are struggling with how to turn this in. Thank you guys.